To the curious, the seekers, and to the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych Podcast. A couple months ago, we did a show on the first round of Democratic debates, and people seemed to enjoy that. So we thought that we would come back for round two. And last night's debate was certainly very interesting, and I don't think any of us lack for anything to say. So we will begin right now. I would just like to introduce myself. I'm Cindy, INFJ, Enneagram 2, Wing 1. And with me are Ken. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Cindy.
And Don. Hi, Don.
Hello, Cindy and Ken.
I think Ken might want to give a bit of an introduction here and begin our conversation.
Sure. We had a limitation. We had 10 candidates, and we had what were perceived, at least by the DNC. There's no slightly cynical there, but in the middle we had Liz Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, and not to be seen at all, Tulsi Gabbard, not on the stage, and her polling numbers have been adequate to definitely put her actually into the front runner with the margin of error. And I did watch the debate with a Democrat, and full disclosure, I am a moderate sort of in-betweener, Republican / libertarian, analytical type. I'm an INTJ in the MBTI world. We probably won't go into the psychology as much in this show, but if you're interested in our first show, we did a full analysis of both the Enneagram and the MBTI. The first, aside from the absence of Tulsi, which I guess there's not much to talk about if she wasn't there, the significance of that, I don't think can be left as a stone can't be left unturned, because there were some very weak performances on stage. I would point to Julian Castro, and from Beto wasn't exactly hitting it out of the park either. So Bernie Sanders appeared to have a voice problem that was evident right from the first line, and I think that did hurt him. There's just no way around it. It's kind of sad for the Bernie supporters out there and people who follow Bernie. He really does thrive on good vocal presentation, and that's kind of his edge, and it wasn't there for him. Joe Biden came out of the gate looking very good, but he just didn't last. It was a 3-hour debate, and we'll go into some of the details after we do a little round robin here. But Don or Cindy, what were your first impressions in the first 15 minutes or so?
Real briefly, I'm sure Don has a lot of comments, but before we get too far off the Tulsi subject, that reminds me so much of how Ron Paul was treated in, was it 2012? That he wasn't considered, wasn't permitted to, I think finally they let him speak at the convention, but he was just completely excluded from serious consideration, when I think there were probably many, many people who would have gladly voted for him.
He came in second in the New Hampshire primary too, which was significant enough. And I think they did put him in the convention, but he got a very odd time slot.
Yeah, all the tricks that were used to marginalize somebody were used against Ron Paul, at least in 2008, and I think beyond that too. There was really a growing grassroots movement it had a lot of steam on YouTube, and YouTube, this was the early days before people learned to recognize how manipulative they were, and YouTube basically killed the Ron Paul movement online before it had the chance to go mainstream. And so any opportunity to come through from the alternative media into the new media, that was really Ron Paul's problem, and it is the same problem that Tulsi Gabbard is having. She's not establishment, and that's real clear. But a lot of Americans want anti-establishment, especially on the left. That's been lacking. They think they might get it with Bernie. Not so sure about that, but Tulsi seems very genuine, but she's being excluded.
I think part of it may be payback for the standoff with Kamala in the either the first or second debate. Well, I guess there were two separate nights. 1 and 2 were staggered. It was a very large field, very similar to the Republican field. But ironically enough, we had Bernie Sanders marginalized in 2016 or 2015 during the primary season, and just a straw poll here. I'm not convinced that Trump would have won with Bernie as his opponent. But what's the feeling on that?
I think you might be right. There was actually a coded message, and I don't know if any conspiracy theorists that are listening might remember this, but I do remember it real clearly. Right after Trump won the election, there was a letter that came out on apparently official letterhead. I don't remember what exactly, but from Donald Trump with on the left-hand column, and the letters on the left spelled out the message, taking it vertically. It said Bernie would have won, and that was a coded message there. It's basically the Democrats sabotaged themselves by putting Hillary in there instead of Bernie. I do believe that.
What do you think, Cindy?
I'm not as sure, although I do know that there were a lot of, or I've heard, I don't know for a fact, but it seems that there were a lot of embittered Bernie fans who then became Trump voters. And I think that we might have one among our small number here, don't we? Ken, didn't you weren't you kind of hoping that Bernie would win the Democratic convention and have the nomination?
Well, it's just briefly, it was my attachment to the Libertarian Party in 2012. I was in New Hampshire, and it was very exciting. I was working with the kids there one of my sons was in Youth for Paul, and so I was able to get into the headquarters, and it was very exciting. So that I was more of a Rand Paul fan, and that's really what kind of rubbed me the wrong way with Donald Trump. And we'll get into the psychology of this a little bit. I might touch upon it here. Is I don't look upon candidates as fashion statement items, and I'm a TJ in MBTI terms. I sort my world through logic most of the time, not always, but especially with politics, it just doesn't. The attachment to an image doesn't really affect me as much as the issues. And so, but just a brief runaround here on that issue. I was supporting Rand Paul in the primaries, and figured that Bernie would be an easier candidate to beat. And I just didn't like the Clintons. I didn't see any material there that resonated as a political platform. And I just didn't want to see Bill running around, padding around the White House in slippers, raiding the refrigerator in the middle of the night and doing the Easter egg roll. It just seemed ludicrous to have a male first lady. I don't know. But there's no way another Bush Clinton election was just unthinkable. So, yeah. So Bernie, I like Bernie. I mean, as a person, I like him. I don't like, as I've gotten more serious about platforms, I'm not a big fan of certainly the socialist angle. Yet I think Bernie probably would have been limited, just like Donald Trump. I think they might have harassed Bernie, come up with some Russian conspiracy or something. Again, we'll get into this in a little more depth later after we go around a little. I'm pinning it on Donald Trump. It's all about Donald Trump, and about half the candidates were still on the anti-Trump bandwagon, and some were not, which will be pointed out. But whoever came in from the outside would have gotten the same treatment. Maybe it would have been Russia. They would have, maybe Bernie. I know Bernie's wife had a funding issue with one of the colleges, and that would have probably blown up. So they would have done something to Bernie. Any outsider that comes in from the outside is going to get the business. And we look back with hindsight and can see that just because it's Donald Trump, it could have been anybody from the outside, and they would have gotten the same treatment. But the FJ, the extroverted feeler, is convinced that it's the individual Donald Trump. It's been very effectively promoted by the media by turning it into a popularity contest.
Yeah, and it becomes popularity in the sense of its establishment versus outsider, its insider versus outsider, and that's, as you were saying earlier, Ken. That's why I think the new people, have to kind of play up to the front runner, and they have to like not insult the front runner. And what's really going on there, in order for them to get traction, in order for them to be liked, but what's really going on there, it's not so much the front runner that's giving the approval or disapproval or the acceptance or the unacceptance, but the establishment, and especially the establishment media. So this is really a change in American psychology that's happening right now, where we actually begin to see, as a nation, the influence that the media has over picking winners and losers. And it's become pretty blatant in many respects. But I want to also point out that I am also an INTJ and Enneagram 5, and the difference between the way Ken, who is also an INTJ, and the way that I, as an INTJ 5, approach things is that Ken kind of sees a consensus of opinion as part of his analytical process. Being a 9, that's what 9s are all about, is the sensing the consensus. Whereas as a 5, I pretty much separate my thought process from the group, and it's two very different things. So that's why Ken's analysis and mine will be a little bit different, even though we are both INTJs. And I think it's important for people to understand what's going on in our minds as we're giving you this information. It'll help you realize what's important to you as you discern between the differences in the thought process.
Cindy, what was your impression of just focusing on the front runners, at least as far as the media is concerned, Joe Biden, the sort of that Joe Biden, Liz Warren interaction, or the differences?
Quite honestly, as the NF in the crowd, Liz Warren, just separating out what I know about her, but just watching her performance, quite honestly, she just seems like a nice lady with good intentions. Now, that's her persona that she wants to project, and I'm not buying it, but that is how I perceived her watching this debate. I perceived Joe Biden as kind of flaky, not quite with it. I perceived Bernie as angry, just angry. That's all I saw when I saw and heard Bernie, anger. I guess, my pick out of this group would be Amy, is it Klobuchar? She made a great impression, but I have to say that she's not electable because she's not glitzy. And there's nothing that's going to, let's face it, most voters aren't looking for just a nice person with seemingly good intentions. And the other, I don't know if you would consider Kamala a front runner. And I know Amy's not either, but it seemed to me that Kamala was the one who had been selected and maybe anointed to take pot shots at the president, at Donald Trump. So that was that's my flyby on these, and I won't even comment on most of the other guys. I felt like Beto O'Rourke made a very poor showing, as did the other guys that I'm not really mentioning. It was very lackluster how they presented themselves.
Yeah, and Don, thank you. Trailing on, I am Enneagram 9, and it's very accurate what you said. And one thing I really watch quite a bit is just the vector of social energy behind the candidate. And in this case, as we saw in the midterms, as we move towards 2020, the vector of social gravitation against can be just as strong as pro. So we have the anti-Trump motivation that came out in the midterms, and the title of our first show, right after debate 2, was actually Trump versus anti-Trump. And my perception of the front runners, if we look at the four, again, Liz Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Kamala, it was kind of a demolition derby. And I agree about Amy Klobuchar. And I think the biggest tell, as far as just presentation and level-headedness, was, did they mention Donald Trump or not? And I think the right answer from a political standpoint is just to not mention Donald Trump at this point as much, even though it does get some, cheap emotional resonance from the crowd. Amy, especially, was very impressive, and I don't believe she even mentioned his name once. Pete Buttigieg, maybe due to his military background, he was in Navy intel, and it was the same way. He was very reserved in taking personal pot shots and stayed much more level-headedly focused on content rather than schoolyard personality shots. The rest of the field kind of fell into the middle, but especially I would say Julian Castro was just horrific up there. And that's what really bothered me about not seeing Tulsi up there. I think Andrew Yang also just kind of a chair warmer. I don't know if they were sitting, but a podium warmer, let's call it.
Milk toast. That's how I would describe those guys. Milk toast.
Yeah, and Beto has pretty good delivery, but this reparations bill is just, I don't know, that's just virtue signaling. That would never
Tell
pass.
me what you think of this idea, Ken. I think. What about that? If the Democrats are really at this point of the game, not so much wanting to see who comes out on top, but more trying to give the public the various flavors that they can appeal to in the non-Trump supporting America. Like, you'll get all these people, but they're all Democrats. And so it's not, in a sense, it's not so much important, who comes out on top, but what kind of image the Democrat Party is portraying. And of course, some of the people are going to focus on, I'm the biggest Trump hater. Well, no, I'm the biggest gun confiscator, or, no, I'm the this or the that. And anybody that considers themselves within the pull of the Democratic Party is going to find something to their liking within one or two or however many of the candidates. And they may not decide on one, and there is still a theory out there that somebody with big name, huge draw capability is going to come in at the last minute, or maybe not last minute, but at some time in the maybe not too distant future, and say, okay, I'm all of those things, and I'm the one that can beat Trump. What do you think of that scenario?
It could be. I think they do have to fill the time slot, and that was my theory with having Joe Biden kind of out front, absorbing all the lightning and just being kind of a placeholder for, at the time, I thought Kamala Harris, but I don't know. She looks like my neighbor who just lost her cat and can't quite, settle down yet until they find the cat. She doesn't seem presidential or particularly comfortable. She just has this this look of discomfort when she's talking, and it's sad. I think she's a great senator in that party. I think she'll probably be a lifetime senator, as will Amy. But again, it was just kind of to answer your question directly. That's very possible, and they wouldn't want to roll that out too soon, because we're not even closing in on a year that closely yet until you go to the polls. The moment of decision, at least the bit I do know about political strategy is it's the last minute. The timing is very important to not open up the with the heavy maneuvering until that decisive moment.
Yeah, and the more dirty laundry, if there is a swoop in candidate, the more dirty laundry they potentially have, then the later they're going to put them into the game.
Well, again, I think the liberal or the Democratic liberal wing or the ultra liberal wing, they're searching for issues. And the ones that I distilled out of this phenomenon that we witnessed some real and some just created out of thin air. And we'll start with the worst ones first, since we're, just for full disclosure, most of us sort of lean strongly towards the Trump solution this time, not as a fashion statement, but just more as either from a values perspective or from just a common sense perspective on who's going to be better at that for today's challenges. And I say the racism is is a straw man argument. I'm not so sure about it was kind of humorous when they were talking about AR-15 ammunition, because there is no such thing. So the gun issue is important, but I think that'll sort of get mired in details that they don't understand on the other side. And so that's, but they're searching for an issue. I think to answer your question, or to kind of frame it, if somebody does sweep in and pick up the slack or create a new issue. Now, the one thing my Democratic friend who I was watching this with, let's just call her Jamie, had a stunning revelation. I've said it before too, is they didn't once really mention the deficit. Not once did it come up. As far as I could tell, we didn't stay up past about 10 o'clock or so watching it. So, but she noticed it and maybe picked up on it during the first debate. Maybe, I don't know who's the guy that has a basketball team, and I forget his name, but he could swoop in. But you're right, Don. I think it's very possible.
Yeah, I'm curious as to the lack of economic either expertise or even just talking points that are being put out by the Democratic Party. It's either as if they've given up on, attacking Trump on economic matters like the deficit, and basically admitting that the Trump economy is booming, like the Republicans say. Now, I personally think that that's just a numbers game and a manipulative game. But I do think that there is the very strong possibility that the Democratic Party as a whole, who is, make no mistake, these candidates are, they have to get the approval of the Democratic Party at some level to get into this debate. So the fact that there are no anti-Trump economic issues being raised at this point tells me something. It tells me that they've, at this point anyway, decided that that's not a winning issue for them, economics and attacking Trump. Now, of course, Bernie is all about the soaking the rich and changing the whole tax structure, but you don't actually have a pointed criticism of Trump that he's willing to debate. He's got talking points, but they're not really resonating except for those people that actually say, yeah, let's go in the direction of socialism. And that's a non-starter for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it technically is an economic argument, but it's really interesting how it is. Now, they may think that technical economic arguments wouldn't hold the viewers, and that's very possible. Economics is, unless you have a pre-existing interest in the field, can be extremely ponderous. I've seen quite a few yawns when I launched the topic in certain groups, and I'd say that not to overgeneralize too much, but the impulse of again, in the MBTI Jungian world, the feeler-oriented or the values-oriented voter will be more attached. Will take the technical argument and turn it into a values argument. So what we see happening here is the discussion of economics would talk about the distribution of wealth and the social justice issues involved with the distribution, without looking at what's happening under the hood. As in, how do we pay for it? What's the best strategy to pursue this equality, and how can we bulk up our school? The whole issue there. Now, I will say, equal opportunity, the blind spot. There are blind spots on both sides. And the blind spot, I'd say, on the right would be getting overly technical and kind of devaluing the values end of it, and just basing everything on practicality and holding that up as this is how it should be for everybody. Both sides are kind of like that. It's the thinking, feeling dichotomy at work, and mutually exclusive of each other's arguments most of the time. And this is the story of humanity. It's a story of conflict, and it's there to serve a purpose so that the social group itself has a variety of different functional responses to challenges, and the conflict itself is just sort of a way of figuring out which one is going to prevail.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always like to point out about Bernie and the points he makes, and I do tend to agree with a lot of his descriptions of the problem, but the fact that he can describe the problem does not mean that he actually has a workable solution that will fix the problem. So I like to make that distinction, and I think that that's important, and I recognize that a lot of people just seem to assume that if a person understands the problem or can articulate the problem, then by gosh, they must be the person to solve that problem. And really, that's not necessarily the case.
I thought they did touch on economic issues to some extent when they discussed the issue of the tariffs and relationships with China, and also in light of the healthcare issue. I think I heard some numbers thrown around when various candidates were discussing their healthcare proposals. So they were kind of, of course, with the tariffs, they were pretty much united in criticizing President Trump, but the healthcare issue was really pretty divisive. And if there was any interesting emotional charge to this debate, I would say a lot of it had to do with of course, for us, it has to do with the Second Amendment. But among these candidates, I think it was related to their discussion of the healthcare issue and various proposals that have been made.
Right. Yeah, it's a sub-issue with it. Those are economic issues, but they're not attacking Trump on the economy per se. And I think that's the point that Ken and I were trying to make. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to say, well, Trump is blowing it by this trade war and this and that. Yeah, I have a whole slew of thoughts on that, but they're kind of above and beyond what we're going to discuss here today. I think the main point is that with regard to the economy, it's not a winning issue for Democrats at this point, anyway. And the Democratic Party does not seem to be releasing somebody that has economic expertise from within the system, like somebody that is an economic heavyweight, which I really wouldn't consider Bernie an economic heavyweight. It doesn't have credibility from within the system. His whole thing is, well, we need to overhaul the system, which is not from the inside, it's from the outside.
We did see the reemergence of the racism, again, regarding Donald Trump. This is the racism construct and the Russia construct. And the Russia construct is definitely, we're seeing the sunset of that, but surprisingly, Kamala launched into that. I think she said, I kind of jotted it down, but she said the only thing that stopped Donald Trump from indictment was the fact that he was president. And I think she mentioned it was in regards to Russia, which, anybody who's really following this has seen the virtual collapse of the Mueller report strategy and actually the personal collapse. It's kind of sad, actually, of Robert Mueller himself, and the realization that was a straw man. It was sort of like the Nazis' cardboard tanks that they used to kind of fool the opposition, and it just fell apart. And I think it was Robert Mueller was a figurehead, and the real brains of that operation were elsewhere, where the prosecutors, the prosecutorial team, who was very partisan, all Hillary Clinton supporters, but they needed to have a foil to kind of mask that over, and that was the function of that symbol, that construct. And then the racism, which it's still anchored on Charlottesville, and anybody who's followed the channel knows that I believe that was Charlottesville was very real, and Heather Heyer was killed by a neo-Nazi, but both organizers are very suspicious, have very suspicious backgrounds as ex-Democrats, Jason Kessler and Richard Spencer, and I hope that's pursued. But again, the fact that we're still seeing this used indirectly as the anchor, it's just very suspicious to me. And I again, in these cases, we just don't have any proof either way. So I hesitate to really bring it up any more than that. Evidence that they're still using it, and it just doesn't hold water.
Yeah, I hat tip to Scott Adams, who has really highlighted that whole Charlottesville issue and tried his best to get the truth out there about that. And I believe it was within the last week, several days, that I saw Scott Adams tweet that the only tweets of his that he knows of for sure that have been basically blocked, shadow banned, their visibility decreased by Twitter, are those in which he talks about the so-called fine people hoax, which is Charlottesville. So that really is that whole racism Charlottesville issue is something that the mainstream appears to still be trying to put up a defense, or put up the make it a talking point. Unfortunately, there are too few Americans still that understand how these political false flags actually work, and how something can be attributed to something, to someone, just because the media gives it an echo chamber and people don't dig below the surface.
One of the downsides of the partisan debates is we'll only hear one side of an argument if it's a very basic tenet. For instance, the racism, race baiting, and the definitions that are thrown around, and none of them will stand up for Donald Trump, obviously. And also the Russia hoax is either greeted with silence or agreed to as sort of the go-to position. And I guess that's the essence of party politics. But the unchallenged nature of that, it doesn't help educate the people who tuned in, who may be undecided. And I'm pretty sure they don't care if it's true or not. It's more effective. The more effective way to gain votes on both sides is to frame the argument from that point of view. And that's when things like the censorship become very pivotal issues. And President Trump has usually picked on the media, but the more ubiquitous and effective player in this are the tech companies and the Google. Most people are leaving the cable behind. I think broadcast television is really being marginalized in a big way, but the conduit, the cyber link on that would be more significant, and we'll see how that shakes out. But in conclusion, just to kind of rounding the candidates, maybe we can all do this, just take a quick look at the list. I did keep a list running, and I'd say who won the debate, that's a tough question, but it looks like Liz Warren kind of played it safe and sort of toned down her presentation a little bit. Joe seemed to stumble in the latter stages. Bernie was interesting. I'd say just quickly on the health issue, he leaned into pharma, the big pharma, but did not really go after the insurance companies as hard. And that raised my eyebrows a bit. I wonder if he's got a big donor that he's got to please up there. But I would rather have them personally look at, because I think that's a kind of a ubiquitous agreement across the board that would get some conversion votes, to look at the insurance companies who don't wear stethoscopes and are really just pushing papers around and are an abscess on the supply chain. And that's an almost universally shared opinion on both sides. And I wish they would stay on that issue and leave alone some of the other silly issues that just like the Russia and the racism card, which really is divisive. I'd say the strongest the ones who won in my mind, at least, as far as, they can't win, they won't win the nomination, or Amy Klobuchar made a very positive impression on anyone I talked to here, and Pete Buttigieg was, if I'm saying that right, Buttigieg, I think. I remember President Trump was teaching everyone how to speak his name, which was kind of funny, during one of the rallies, and I think he said Buttigieg was the right way to say it. Again, Julian Castro I don't have much respect for him. I think he was involved in the naming, or maybe it was his brother, naming the contributors to the campaign in Texas, publishing names, and that could lead to violence for families and boycotting of businesses. That's just lowball, irresponsible politicking. And the vector of support seems to be lining up as follows. President Trump is getting very good turnout at the rallies and very enthusiastic following. The head count is to be determined, because what wins elections are the votes. So who do I think will be nominated? I have a very kind of odd answer to that, and it's the anti-Trump. Whoever most effectively emotionally enlivens that vector of opposition to President Trump will take the nomination and possibly the election.
Yeah, I have to pretty much agree with you. I think it's worth pointing out that I believe that President Trump has orchestrated the legal concerns, shall we say, so that the Department of Justice is now beginning to go on the attack against let's call it the quasi-coup that was anti-Trump, and that is likely to build steam up to roughly the time of the election, so that it may look good to be anti-Trump now, but if this prosecution of the people attempting the coup gains steam, especially in the courts, that will be a difficult position to be in if the law begins to actually take action, as we see that it's just begun to do with McCabe, and the word is that there's more coming. So the effectiveness of anti-Trump, I believe, has been planned for, and it's not going to be viable, but we shall see. And the other thing I want to agree with you on is that Joe Biden, I would say, not just ran out of steam, but basically, the gaffe machine label really was apparent for all to see. Made some comment that indicated that he believed that he was the sitting vice president, or it came off that way. Just basically not somebody that you could trust to be mentally on the ball to be president. So, and I think another observation I would make is that there were no American flags at that debate, and so the Democrats have decided they're not going to play to patriotism, and I think that's also seen by Tulsi Gabbard not being there, who does have a military background and would actually be able to wave the flag both figuratively and literally, and so the Democrats do seem to be catering to the anti-patriots, and that's unfortunate, but that's what it looks like to me.
I would say that if I didn't know anything about any of these candidates and I just watched that debate, I would say Elizabeth Warren probably was the front runner. Amy Klobuchar, Again, not electable because she's not charismatic enough, but
maybe a VP.
well, maybe, but of course, we have our surprise candidate that I think we're all anticipating, just because none of these people really, nothing against them. They just have a feeling of, being a water carrier for someone else. Although Kamala's the exception. Kamala, when we talked about the last debate, we noted that she's probably Enneagram 8, and she is a boss. It seems clear she bears authority well, and I think she could handle the office. And I think she probably would be charismatic enough. But again, I do know about these people, and as Ken mentioned, Buttigieg, however his name is pronounced, he did make a decent showing. But I know who these people are, and unfortunately, I wouldn't be pleased if any of them received the nomination of their party. If I had to pick one that I think I might be able to tolerate, it would be Amy Klobuchar. But time will tell. We'll see what the Democrats think and how this all plays out, and we'll kind of be on the edge of our seats a little bit, waiting to see if they trot out a surprise candidate at the 11th hour.
What about the anti-Trump, Cindy? Do you think that's a possible winner?
If there were an anti-Trump, I think it might be Kamala Harris. But for dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, the anti-Trump candidate might work. For the feelers, as you often remind us, the anti-Trump candidate might work. But if they talked about in the pregame in the warm-up, the commentators talked a lot about attracting new voters, young voters, people of color, which is, how racist is it to say that? But we'll pass on that. But if they want to attract new voters, then I think they're going to have to do something other than anti-Trump. And I've kind of, the last few weeks, talking to people in different parts of the country, I've kind of had what I almost would call a revelation, that I suspect that there probably were quite a few people, and many of them probably were female feelers, who, when they were in the privacy of the voting booth, pulled the lever for Donald Trump. And I think they'll do it again. I think that women are motivated by many things, but I think fear and a desire for security are both extremely strong motivators for women, even feelers. And I think that a desire for security will move, and has moved, a lot of women to secretly vote for Donald Trump. So the anti-Trump, again, I'm not sure that ideal really works for the voters that these people say they want to attract, but we'll see.
Very good. I think in conclusion, the voting process itself is an introverted function. It's done in the privacy of a voting booth, and while an FJ, I love them all, they may make more noise. The introverted feeler will be that actually is a pretty oppositional dichotomy in and of itself, the extroversion versus introverted, because the values can be held much more deeply and with less fanfare, silently, but they'll come out in the voting booth. And I think in the total polemic, or the head count of estimated introvert versus extrovert, introverts actually do come out a little ahead in the population.
Wow, I don't think I was aware of that, but yeah, I do. I really think that, again, for women, safety, security are big motivators. And if women, they may not admit that to people because it seems weak. But when they are voting and nobody knows how they're voting, I suspect that many of them are actually voting for what they perceive as safety and security, and that would be Donald Trump. He's a father. He's a father figure, as we've mentioned before. And I think whatever they may see in public, a lot of women want to be protected and cared for, and he's the guy to do it.
There's another aspect of the anti-Trump as it pertains to the 2020 elections that I think is worth noting, and that's that President Trump is now very widely known for his criticism of the mainstream media. And of course, the mainstream media is posturing as if to say, we're neutral, we're just telling it like it is, and we're representing those people that are not so sure about President Trump as well as, those that are. However, what will likely play out in a very similar way to what I was just describing to Ken about the legal system, and is that the fact that the media gave so much attention to the Russia hoax and actually hasn't even completely buried the hatchet on that as the prosecutions go forward, the media will have a lot of egg on its face, and the opposite side of that coin is President Trump, and he will get the benefit of the media being in on the hoax and not exposing the Russian hoax, both the Russian hoax and the Fine People hoax, the racism hoax. So a lot of that, I think, the more light that shines on it, the better it is for Trump, and that will make it difficult to be anti-Trump in the 2020.
So, dear curious seekers and experts, we thank you for joining us for this consideration of the narrow down field of the Democrats for this debate. And we hope that you have enjoyed this time as we have. If you have, we would ask you to please click like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our BitChute channel, follow us on Twitter, and until next time, take care.